Okay. Who's ready? Rach, you ready? I assume you're ready. Start. I mean, you'll see in the panel section, they'll just like come streaming in.
Start filling it.
I always worry. It's like when no one comes to your party, you're like,
yeah, are you gonna show up? Wow.
My friend Christian, I'm shouting him out already. He's probably online. He actually thought Vietti tasting was yesterday, so
this is what you're telling me. I'm sorry, Christian.
we sent him some replacement Vietti. So yeah, it's a good time as a charm. I mean, please let us know if you feel like the wines have evolved over the last 24 hours.
Yeah, exactly. A unique perspective on the tasting as a whole.
Sorry, I threw you right in there. I really apologize, Kristen. That wasn't my intention. I was just I was curious as to whether I had already told Tony the story. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Everyone's sort of still coming in, but I thought we might as well get the ball rolling. Welcome to Wine Coaching. I got to stop touching the table. It moves a lot when I touch it. Welcome to Wine Coaching Home, Vietti edition. And I'm really glad you're here. I am really glad to be showcasing these wines. I think they're going to be super fun and really interesting. And a really good snapshot into like the breadth and the spectrum that is Piedmont wine, because it's not always Barolo, it's not always Barbaresco. There are so much more going on. But to do that, I needed to invite a good friend of mine who is my go-to for Italian wine knowledge. I've known her for years. I think we met at a VQA dinner at Thoroughbred, drinking Syrah or something many years.
Roero,
Well, anyway, welcome Toni Webber to Wine Coach at Home. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate your presence, your knowledge, your expertise, and just hope you have fun.
Super excited to be here and super excited to talk about one of my favorite wineries, both before I started working for the agency that represents them, Bricks and Mortar. For a long time, I've really loved these wines. They're beautiful expressions of what they are. They're also made by really lovely, very charming people who always seem like they would throw a great party, which is an important criteria for me when we're talking about winemakers, something I really appreciate.
Exactly. And Italian who can party, I can get behind that.
It's really important. So, and unfortunately, due to COVID-19, we did not get our annual market visit from them. They have always been really consistent in visiting this market and engaging with local trade and hosting really great wine dinners, usually at Barbarians. Last year we did it at Brothers. They're always a really good time. We drink great wine. We are charmed by them. We're very sad we didn't get to do it this year. So
it will happen.
It's a nice stand-in.
Absolutely. And always welcome. Obviously, Rachel's here, our secret psalm on the chat, hidden from view, and so you'll never know her voice. No, you'll know her voice. You know, she's there hanging out, answering any questions you have regarding Piedmont, Barolo, Vietti, the meaning of life, how to play Catan. Whatever you need, she'll be there for you. So before we move on, as we move on, I think it's a lot of people are asking, oh, why'd you do Vietti? Is it like really? I mean, it is a great winemaker, absolutely. But for me, there are two wines that I stock in the store that I've always tried to stock in the store, and they were the first two wines that we're tasting. And so when I was like, how do I showcase Piedmont? I could have spent, I could have like really racked my brains and tried to come up with like, a real like varied sort of interesting sort of lineup of different wines. But at the end, it was like, there's something about the simplicity of just showing you one producer that has this great breadth and like has so many different sort of expressions of Piedmont in their sort of like pocket or in their portfolio that sort of reflects sort of Italian winemaking cuisine. Like there's this level of simplicity that's sort of poetic in itself, and that was kind of where I sort of leapt into this Vietti tasting. I think there's such value in having one producer that like familiar with, especially in Italy, to sort of be your guiding star when you sort of begin to explore and be curious about it. And for me, Vietti has always been Piedmont, and all like the only way I've sort of navigated Piedmont in any capacity. So, I mean, I don't know. Would you say the same thing, I guess, Toni?
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I think that there's a breadth to the wines that they produce. As you said, they make a lot of different wines, but they make them all to the same level of quality. And they're able to, over years of accumulating more parcels, some of the, we're going to taste a lot of estate grown fruit here, but also some well-purchased fruit. And through decades and decades in Piedmont developing these relationships, they've been able to expand their holdings in a way that makes the wines accessible from a price perspective. Like when we're looking at something like the Perbacco that we're going to taste, for example, and the Barbera d'Asti, the Tre Vigne, they represent amazing value in a region that is increasingly a challenging place to find value-driven wines. So I think they're a perfect choice in that respect as well. Like these are still accessible wines, although they do make some, banging cellar-worthy, exceptional, prohibitively priced wines as well. They also cover the other end of the spectrum, and they do it very, very well.
Yeah, and look, this, as always, like this isn't a exercise in patting Vietti on the back and saying how great they are. This is an exercise in giving you the confidence to navigate this region and find wines that you might like and enjoy. And if we can remove the variable of producer from this sort of exercise, I really think you'll sort of get a better understanding.
100%.
Yeah, and obviously and the other thing I love about Vietti, and I don't know if you are the audience are aware, is that they have this sort of artistic streak that I think is obviously thrown through their labels, but you can kind of begin to see it also in their winemaking and the wines that they make. For example, the Brazier that they make, that's like slightly sparkling, and it's such a strange expression, but also very quirky and very sort of Italian. But that's kind of the reason we decided to print the labels on the little pouches that you all have, so that you can sort of get a better understanding as like that there is something creative and something artistic about this wine making family, and sort of,
yeah,
I really appreciate. Yeah. But let's drink some wine, because that's why we're here. Wine number one, white wine, Roero, Arneis. Really, I've got to get better at this. I think
that's
good. Forward more. I don't know.
Lean into the ring line.
But before we get into tasting this is my favorite white wine in the entire world. Not gonna lie. Like, if I opened a restaurant and could only serve one white wine, this would be it. I couldn't pick a red. I haven't picked a red. I've been thinking about this for literally years, but to preface my enthusiasm for this wine, it is in my mind and in my heart the like perfect wine.
I think crowd pleaser is a really easy way to describe this wine. I don't think I've ever poured it for anyone who didn't enjoy it on some level, if not on every level. So I think you have a lot of people who would agree with you there. I think it's a really interesting wine to start with when we're talking about the story of the winery and also the region. So with Arneis, and this particular Arneis, we're talking about Roero, which is very close to Barolo, but also completely different. So separated by the Tenaro River, both Barolo and Roero border the river, but Roero is on the west side. And sandier soils, typically easier going wines, mostly planted to Arneis, although increasingly more and more Nebbiolo is planted there, especially as the prices of land in Barolo proper and its communes continue to rise. And Arneis is planted all over the world. There's some really interesting examples being made in Australia, California.
Oh yeah, I absolutely remember having an ace from
Mac Forbes makes a really good Arneis in Victoria, but I think unequivocally Roero is its sort of ancestral homeland and where you're going to see the truest expression. There's an interesting backstory to this grape, especially in the way that it relates to Vietti. So maybe I'll give a little bit of background to the history of the winery. So it's fourth generation winemakers at this point. The current winemaker is Luca Corrado, and he and his wife Elena run the estate. Around 1919 is when they started first estate bottling. They were among one of the first in Piemonte to do that. That was Mario Vietti. And then his daughter, Luciana, married Alfredo Vietti, and that was in the 50s. So Alfredo Corrado. So while it's the Corrado family that runs the estate, it's a little bit confusing for some people. It is still technically the Vietti family. It's just the matriarch married the Corrado. Anyway, when Alfredo took over the estate, he did make a few changes, as it was a really interesting time in the region. It was sort of the slow burn towards the dominance that we see in terms of Italian wine and fine Italian wine, and how Piemonte kind of ranks in that way now. But in the 50s, it was still a very, no, I wouldn't say unknown region, but it was really just starting to become a collector's wine on the level of Bordeaux and Burgundy. And even at that point had barely just begun. When we're going back to the 50s and early 60s, Arneis was barely planted anywhere in the region. Actually, the word translates in Piemontese dialect into little rascal. So it is a notoriously difficult grape to grow. The birds love it and often eat it. It actually used to be planted in rows of Nebbiolo in order to encourage the birds to eat that instead of the Nebbiolo grapes. It's actually a really delicious table grape, which you can't say about all Vitis vinifera fruit. And the acidity is quite low. So you have this issue from a viticultural perspective of kind of like an avocado, where it's like, it's not ready, it's not ready, it's not ripe, it's not ripe. And then you go away for a day and you come back and it's like dropped all its acidity and you have a flabby wine. So from an investment point of view, it takes a lot of work to make great Arneis, and there isn't as much of a return, obviously, on that investment as you would see if you were working with Nebbiolo.
The acidity is great on this. I think
they're really fresh wines for sure. They're not screaming with acidity. I think it's part of why it's such a popular grape in the spectrum of Italian whites, is because it has this ease to it and this enjoyability that you don't always see with, I think a lot of people think of a bonier wine when they're thinking of Italian whites, maybe like borderline anemic, especially if you're talking about like Tuscan whites and that kind of thing, Vernaccia. Like these are the kinds of wines that were initially coming into, that were representing Italian whites on a whole up until like 20 years ago in our market and most international markets. So there was a lack of understanding of, you know, what Italian whites were capable of. And Arneis was one of the first big success stories from an Italian white point of view in the 80s, when people started drinking it outside of Italy. And it really pick up on the international market because it was so easy to like.
Look, so, I think I've had some not great Arneis before, and I think you've touched on a good point, is that in order to preserve acidity, they might pick a bit earlier, and therefore you're lacking that ripeness and that flavor that's clearly evident in the wine. And if you're around a wine shop or LCBO and you see an Arneis on the shelf, like there is that risk that you're going to have, is that you miss out on that sort of character unless you pick it just right. Like the beauty of this wine, it has this herbal sage kind of soft leaf green thing going on that it speaks to me so well in terms of food pairing, in terms of just like, it's probably why I like Bruno so much. You have this more savory vegetal expression of white wine, and that's kind of the beauty, like what attracts me to this wine. And I don't think you would get that if you picked it a little earlier. I think getting that sort of slight touch of herbalness is like a really like nice edge in order to like obtain and
Exactly. It's what makes the wine compelling and just complex enough to be intriguing while still being enjoyable, and easy to drink early as well.
this label is like from this, like in the 70s, right? I remember it's like it's a
Yeah. So okay. So the labels for the wine, the lineup across the board, were made by an artist called Gianni Gallo. So he's quite famous, especially in the Piemontese wine community. He's from Doliani, which is a commune not far from Barolo. Exactly. And he was a peer of Alfredo Corrado in that they were just friends and they were buddies. And from a certain perspective, and certainly I believe this, when you're making wine, you are making art in a certain way. And they shared a lot of sensibilities. They were friends. They drank wine together. And at a certain point in the early 70s, Alfredo asked Gianni to start designing his labels for him. At the time, this was pretty outside of the conventional box in terms of what you were seeing from other wineries in Barolo. Definitely, they were accused of maybe the wines look silly, they don't look serious. But Alfredo really believed in it, and it became really an iconic part of how the winery is known around the world. And that is now translated into for their Valero, which is their Reserva. They have an artist label. So every year, they don't release Valero every year. It's only in the best vintages. But every Valero release, they have a different Italian artist design a different label. Okay. And as this is a Reserva and an especially powerful Reserva, Valero is a truly powerful cru. They are wines that are meant to age for quite some time. So the fact that you have this kind of time capsule with this artist also contributed to this beautiful piece of art.
Yeah,
both in the bottle and outside. I think it's
exactly, and I think that's always going to stick out to you when you are shopping, like in Italy section. Like you'll notice Vietti wines because of their like more artistic sort of labels that kind of are the way that I kind of remember, like how I remember them and how I kind of like keep them.
Same here. Yeah. It's one of the first things that I remember. It makes the wines very memorable. And, interesting when you're talking about a wine like the Reserva and the Valero and the fact that there's a different label associated with every vintage. That makes it, each vintage that you enjoy, it creates this other layer of memory and sensory memory for you, right? Of that time that you enjoyed that wine with that specific label. I think it's really smart from a marketing point of view and also just really beautiful. Oh, yeah. The label for the Arneis in particular is really interesting because we're talking about the history of the winery and Alfredo Corrado. So the gentleman who is covered in vines on the label is supposed to be Alfredo and was drawn by Gianni as a kind of homage to Alfredo's work with the Arneis variety because
I'm mad or really happy if someone drew me a picture.
Well, so I think it has to do with how challenging it is to grow Arneis. The idea that he's like a man amongst the vines, kind of slowly losing his mind or something like that. But the Vietti family has been credited along with Giacosa with being responsible for keeping this grape alive. Like as I was saying, in the early 60s, there was barely any planted. The history of the grape is that it used to be used as a deterrent in the vineyards. It was added sometimes to both Barbera and Nebbiolo because the acidity is so high in those grapes that some winemakers would add a small amount and co-ferment it to tame some of the acidity that you would see in Nebbiolo and Barbera.
Rachel's like, I wish I had a caper heavy pasta to eat this, and that's absolutely what I want.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
It's really good. Yeah. We'll have pasta corner next week. No, we won't. That's the label. It's really great. You'll also notice it because it's got a red and white checker foil capsule, which I think is cool. And I think red and white checker is the wrong way to say it, but there's probably a more.
Yeah, they started doing that a few years ago, and I don't actually know why. That only started appearing though a few vintages ago.
I like this.
Very enjoyable. A couple other like kind of hard facts about the wine. It's 25-year-old vines. It's from Santo Stefano, so in the center of the Roero commune. It's all stainless steel. There is no mallow, but they do rest it on its leaves for a little bit, which kind of helps with some of that texture.
I wanted to touch briefly, sorry to interrupt, on other whites from, or I guess other native white varietals from Piedmont, because I think they're really important. And you will see Chardonnay and Riesling and Sauvignon Blanc, and God bless it, it's beautiful, they're great wines. But I also want to challenge people to like, Arneis is one of like these great classic white varietals from, or white wines from Piedmont. But I mean, Vietti is almost also famous for like the Timorasso, which is again another strange name, strange wine, very rare. You hardly ever see it. But like, I don't know, can you maybe talk about how you like what in like 2 minutes, like what that wine is, and like why you would make two white wines if you're a Barolo house? I don't know. It's
Absolutely. I mean, Timorasso is a really interesting variety in general. Like you said, there's not very much planted. Very little. I think it's like less than 10 hectares. There might be more now, but last time I checked, that was how much. And the gentleman who is kind of the steward of this grape is called Walter Massa. His wines were in our market for a period. I haven't seen them for a while. If you do see them, definitely buy them. They're stunning. When we're talking about the qualities that the grape has, I mean, sometimes you hear it compared to Riesling, I think because it can take on these like honey tones and these sort of apricot notes and this floral note as well. The acidity isn't quite as high, but it's definitely a pretty powerful textured wine with an incredibly fresh finish and age worthy. I mean, I would say the thing about the Arneis is like get it in ya. You can age it and it's quite interesting. It is more oxidization. So when you see it like a year, I always find it really interesting. Like I had some of the 18 not long ago, so it's just the vintage prior, but the evolution of the wine even in a year is like pretty striking. And you also develop some of those kind of honey tones with Arneis with very short period of time in bottle, whereas Timorasso has the ability to age much longer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think Vietti in general, like it's a really exciting time for the winery in terms of their expansion plans. They're looking at maybe expanding the cru bottlings that they're doing. They're looking at Alto Piemonte. They have long been interested in Dertona and Timorasso. It's just, when was the right time for them? But that's something that I think, as we discuss all of the wines in the lineup, the fact is that they've always been kind of visionaries in the region and often maybe not been the first to do something, but they have been very easily convinced by their peers that change is good and new things are exciting. And, they're not like stuck in traditional ways.
We talked about that even like in our Chablis class. It's like there is a certain level of like I don't know, appeal, especially for me, to like winemakers who are coming in and evolving the style and not getting stuck in what is old school, what is traditional, and still keeping the vision of that region and that winemaking style, but like having the courage to like evolve it and move it forward and see what you get. Like you also are familiar with the Vauquerès wines that we were tasting during our Chablis classes. And like, you just see this like evolution of Chablis that kind of also reminds me of Vietti and what it can do to like, what they are doing to like evolve the style and bring about a different take so that people aren't just assuming, oh, I've had Dolcetto 10 years ago, I don't like it. I've had Barbera, I don't like it.
Well,
it's important to revisit these things.
Chablis is another really interesting region. There are a few that I can think of that would be a lateral to Piedmont and to Barolo specifically in terms of the effects of climate change and how interesting it is to observe these effects in these regions in particular that were once so marginal in terms of their ability to ripen grapes. And I think we can talk about that a little bit more maybe when we get to the Barolo and sort of the significance of the 16 vintage, but then also looking at the last 20 years in Piedmont. I think that will be a very interesting conversation to have, but very similarly, Chablis being such a cool climate region on the edge kind of where you could traditionally ripen grapes is now fighting higher alcohol levels, fighting flabbiness in the wine sometimes, it's very interesting and scary.
Let's go to wine number 2.
Yeah.
Barbera d'Asti. If there is a wine that, if there is three words, well, it's technically three words, that would describe me, it's Barbera d'Asti. I love Barbera. I love it. It's my favorite grape in, oh, maybe if I do that. No. It's my favorite grape in all of Piedmont, all of probably Italy. I love Barbera more than anything.
I love how much you love Barbera. I
Sorry?
love Barbera too. Doesn't get enough love.
Yeah, I know. Like, it's that probably that Australian sort of dirtbag part of me. Like, I mean, I can drink a Barolo, I drink Nebbiolo, yeah. But like, what represents me is Barbera. It's a little classy, a little trashy, interesting, can do a lot of things. I mean, not, it's well-rounded. It's a total package.
100%.
This wine, I'm going to put it in the chat. This is the one I want to stock every single day, 365 of the entire year. I can't think of a better red wine to sell people than this. And I want everyone to come in and go, oh, you know what? I just want the Barbera d'Asti. I just want that Barbera d'Asti. And it's really, really such a simple one. And simple in that, you don't need to ponder. It's an easy wine to just go, that's for me. Asti is not near Barolo. It's a town that's sort of slightly northeast.
Yeah.
But it is sort of considered the best region for Barbera.
Yeah, exactly.
You may argue against that, but I think you should get a really good expression of Barbera in Barbera d'Asti.
100%. Yeah, I think the region for that, there are definitely some exceptional Barbera d'Albas for sure. But I think why you see more consistently high quality from Barbera d'Asti for the price is because it's not near Barolo. So in Barbera d'Alba, there's often this that the vines have been reallocated to lesser sites in order to make room for more Nebbiolo plantings because they can successfully plant Nebbiolo there, whereas that in Asti there's a little bit less of that. But again, you can see spectacular Barbera d'Alba. It's just typically going to be a more serious wine, a more top tier wine, a different price point.
There is a universe, there is a parallel universe where instead of Nebbiolo being planted in Barolo and Barbaresco, that it was Barbera, and I want to visit that. That's the beauty of, for me, that Barbera is you're always curious as to see how far they can push it, how great they can make it. How great Barolo and Nebbiolo can be. It's clear, it's established. But with Barbera, it's you're so curious to continue to taste and see what are they gonna bring to this wine, how are they gonna make it greater. It's got room to grow, and I'm very enthusiastic about Barbera. I apologize. That's really apologize. I mean, that's why we'll never do an Austrian wine session. Well, maybe, but because I'll be just bouncing off the walls in
with enthusiasm.
Yeah, exactly. But I hope everyone likes this wine. If you don't, I'm really sorry. You have different tastes than me, and you're not wrong. Everyone can have their opinion, but this is a great one.
So I guess a little bit of just context on this particular bottling from them. They do make a Barbera d'Alba Tre Vigne as well. They're also, Vietti is quite well known and well regarded for their kind of relationship with the grape. And when we're talking about people ripping up old Barbera vines in order to plant Nebbiolo, maybe in sites that aren't perfectly suited to it, but they just want to keep pumping out the Nebbiolo, pumping out the Barolo as much as they can because the market will pay more for it. Vietti has never really done that, and they have preserved a lot of their old vine plantings, both in Asti and in Alba, specifically the Scarone Cru.
Oh, I've got a bottle of that. That is my favorite wine in the entire, my favorite Barbera in the entire world. I'll get it.
They are quite famous for that. That is in Castiglione Filetto. It's actually like right underneath the part of the crew is directly underneath the winery proper. Vines go back to the 1950s. It's a pretty exceptional site, especially on such prized land. Exactly, the grasshopper. The Vigna Vecchia is, I think consistently rated the best Barbera.
It's a wonderful one.
It's kind of hard to argue with it. In terms of Barbera d'Asti, they do also make the La Crena, which is they're a little less famous for, but it's an equally exceptional wine. Some of the fruit in the Tre Vigne actually comes from the La Crena vineyard, and the vines there date back to 1932. For me, with Barbera, vine age is where you start to see a really big difference in the quality of the wines. And I've had La Crena somewhat recently from the 90s, early 90s, that blew my mind. So you can age these wines for quite some time when they're made well and made with intention. But you can also
in Alto Piedmont do a really good. They've got a lot of old Barbera, and it has this soy and umami kind of expression, which is really, you don't see a lot in old wines. To that intensity, but also in balance. And I think, I just hope as I grow older, the way people grow Barbera evolves, and I get to sort of see what this grape is capable of. A few people in the chat were asking about oak. Is there oak in this wine? Is there?
Yeah. So this is, like I said, it's made from 3 different vineyards, one of which is the La Crena parcel, so older vines. And then in terms of winemaking, it's a mix of different aging vessels. So all of the fermentation happens in stainless steel. They ferment all of their wines in stainless steel. And then it spends quite a bit of time on the lees. Luca is very interested. I mean, I think he employs lees more than a lot of other winemakers do in the region for both his Barolo and his Barbera, but the light kind of went off for him when he started using extensive lees contact for the Barberas in particular. He considers that to be essential to making the wines as good as they are.
Yeah, it absolutely gives a textural component, and for those who aren't familiar with the grape, Barbera is kind of is known for having very low tannins and low tannic profile. So it can tend to have this very juicy, easy drinking sort of quality. And so I think by adding that lees component, you begin to get a bit more texture and a bit more in sort of the back of your palate, which is going to add to that ageability, going to add to that seriousness. And this isn't it is considered an easy drinking wine, Barbera, generally on a wine list by the glass. This isn't I wouldn't describe this as easy drinking. This is kind of beginning to become serious, beginning to become I'm going to take this to my parents' house or my in-laws or impress someone with this bottle of wine. And I think that's the versatility of Barbera.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, there is a little bit of Barrique. There's some tonneau in terms of the élevage. I'm not sure exactly the percentage. I do detect a little bit of new oak on the nose as well, but I actually find it pretty well integrated for me.
And I think the people are giving some food suggestions, and that's one of the diminished tannins in Barbera is going to make it really good with spicy food, and really good option for spicy sort of styles of meat, because you're not going to have that tannin protein, tannin and capsaicin sort of interaction where you get that bitterness. And I think that's a really great option. And I pulled this out maybe 45 minutes ago from the fridge, and it's a little chilly. It's probably a little colder than I would like, but it's drinking really great. And I think having a little chill on that, adding that to your hot pot or Korean barbecue, what people are saying, it's such a good wine for that. And finding red wines that pair well with spicy food that isn't Pinot Noir or Gamay is great. You've got a third wine in your back pocket to pick from, and that's a really important kind of, I don't know, takeaway from this.
Yeah, I actually also I think sometimes you hear Barolo with a fatty steak, like a ribeye or something like that. But I actually love these Barberas, in particular, really well made Barbera with a steak, because it does have that core fruit. If you've got a charred steak, it really interacts really beautifully with that char from the grill. it's just like really, really enjoyable and kind of a surprise for some people, I think, who think of it as like this easy drinking everyday kind of wine, but it can be kind of the centerpiece at your table at a really special meal as well.
Yeah. Let's move on to wine number 3, because I'm going to save all our Barbera material for our Barbera masterclass.
Oh, okay.
Doing somehow. Okay, so there's a reason why the Vietti class has been really popular, and we held a second session. And I wish it was because of the Barbera. I wish people were like, oh my god, I love Barbera so much. Everyone wants to taste it. But the reality is, it's because of the Nebbiolo, and it's because of the Barolo. So let's dig into the grape that sort of defines Piedmont and figure out, like, I really want to give you guys the tools to like understand and feel a little bit more confident and under like the different levels of Barolo, Nebbiolo, Barbaresco, what it all means, and just like, so you're not getting taken advantage of. And that's a big part sometimes of Piedmont, is that, or Nebbiolo wine producers, is that they can use that name and get more money out of you than perhaps the wine deserves. But not in this case. I'm not suggesting that Vietti is a part of that, but like, it is an important, Nebbiolo is a fraught with lots of dangers, and one of them is, marketing. So let's talk about wine number 3, the Perbacco. Before we go on, I didn't really look up what Perbacco means.
So I've been told a couple of different things, and then it was cleared up for me by the Corrado family. So I had originally been told, like many years ago when I first started working with this wine, and I told a lot of people this, apparently very incorrectly, that Perbacco means for Bacchus, as in the like Roman god of drinking wine, which made a lot of sense to me and sounded correct. But apparently it's just Piemontese slang for like, that's effing delicious, basically. And that was originally said by Luca's mother, Luciana Vietti, when she tasted Perbacco for the first time. She thought it was Barolo and thought it was just delicious. So they only started making this wine when Luca took over as winemaker in the like late 90s. As a way of kind of focusing the Castiglione bottlings a little bit more and making some more distinctions in the lineup. They started using the younger vines that would have initially gone into Castiglione for Perbacco. Now it's more of a barrel selection. So it's just the most approachable of their barrels of Nebbiolo that would have otherwise gone into Castiglione, they use for Perbacco. All of the vines, all of the fruit that they're using for Perbacco is from Barolo. So they could.
Hey, going, hey, like, whew, I'm out of breath. I'm drinking Nebbiolo, and that's the first thing I want from a Langhe Nebbiolo. So like, Langhe is this region within Piedmont. That's sort of where Barolo sits. And so Langhe is a general appellation. So it's like, oh, we don't have the aging requirements or the geographic location to call a more specific term, and so we will use the word Langhe. So that's a really good indicator of where in Piedmont or where in Italy this Nebbiolo comes from. And I think for Langhe, this is $55. This is a really delicious wine. For me, and when I put a Langhe or a non-Barolo Nebbiolo on the list, I'm always looking for that classic Nebbiolo flavor. So I want those tannins. I want that red fruit. I want the acidity. I want that kind of fire and roses thing that everyone talks about. But I also want it to be drinkable and like have a little plushness to it. And I think this delivers on that.
Yeah, I think that's what it's always, and it became a massively popular wine for them once they started making it. Again, I think because of the accessible price point, but also just how accessible the wine is when it's young. And I've had older examples of this, and it does age fairly well. But when you even nose this next to the 16 Castiglione, I mean, these are completely different wines that are at completely different stages of their evolution. Despite both being very like excellent examples of the grape, this is something that I think is ready to go.
Yep, absolutely.
Versus
Ready
the
to go.
Barolo, I would say, is showing quite a bit, but is packed with potential and should probably be aged a good deal longer.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I've always loved this wine. We kind of can't keep it in stock.
I think this is a wonderful wine, and I think there are some I think that there are lots of Langhe Nebbiolos you can have, and I think a good start is like a quality Barolo producer. See if they have a Langhe that they make, a Langhe Nebbiolo that they make, and I think you're going to get, similar to Vietti, a style where they select the wines, different barrels, or like wines that aren't showing as well as they want them to in that higher level, and declassifying, for lack of a better word, into a more approachable wine. And I think that's a good starting point when you talk about Langhe and Nebbiolo.
Yeah, and I think in terms of like how you want your brand to be represented, right? Like it's just you divide your barrels based on what has the capacity to go the long haul, because that's what people are expecting when they're buying Barolo, is a wine that they can age for a long period of time. So I think for me, where this wine has always, and you kind of touched on this as well, where it's always kind of set itself apart from some other Langhe Nebbiolos, although it definitely has some peers in this respect, but rarely in the same price point. Like I've had some incredible Langhe Nebbiolos from great producers. They just tend to be almost twice the price, where you're not just getting a fruity expression of Nebbiolo. Like there are layers to this in the glass that remind you of what great Barolo is supposed to smell and taste like, as opposed to just being kind of on its fruit, which is not a bad thing and still very enjoyable, but kind of lacking some of the nuance and the intrigue that makes Nebbiolo such a compelling grape, right? And why people pursue it. So I just, for the value that's represented here, it's hard to beat.
I think it's a really good example of how Piedmont kind of, I don't know whether deliberately, but they figured out that you need a progression to get to Barolo. Like you can't just dump as much Barolo onto a market as possible, because that is $100 or $75 plus a bottle, and you'll never grow that market because you're never allowing people the opportunity to get to Barolo as a point. And what we saw maybe 5-10 years ago in Nebbiolo is that these releases of Langhe Nebbiolo as a way to give people a stepping stone and a more familiar sort of to grow into Barolo, as much as so that the market continues to stay grow and sustain as the wines age, or as the region ages.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're seeing it in Burgundy, especially, where you're not seeing wines. All these amazing wines aren't being bought by younger people, or you're not seeing them in restaurants because there's no access to them at a lower price point, at a more simpler expression. And we're seeing these Burgundy producers scramble to create wines that people can drink that are $30-$40 a bottle. And the beauty of it is that Barolo is ready now, and you can have if you've never had Barolo or you're not really interested in it, you can have a Nebbiolo, and then Langhe Nebbiolo, and you can kind of evolve as you grow older and as you earn more money. Let's face it, wine is money. You can afford more Barolos, and you've got a bit more. When you get to that point where you can afford a bottle of Barolo, you've got the experience and the tools and the palate to appreciate what you're buying. And I think that's a really important lesson.
Exactly. And I think as well, to your point, now is an incredibly exciting time in the last few years for Langhe Nebbiolo in general, across the board, not just Vietti, just in general, because we touched on this a little bit before. The way that climate change is impacting this region is significant, and in some ways in a positive way. And you see this in Champagne as well, right? They're having amazing vintage after amazing vintage after amazing vintage, when it used to be once in a decade. And in Barolo, they used to pick these grapes in the snow because they weren't ripe until November, and they're sorting and sorting and sorting. So there wasn't enough fruit to make, an abundance of wine. And now it's they're having, in the last 20 years, there's been one truly bad vintage, and more than 5 great vintages.
Yeah.
And you can't really say that about almost any other serious wine region, right? So it's and smart wineries, and there's a lot of them, and quality focused wineries, and there's a lot of them in Piemonte. They're noticing this, and they're meeting the market with these affordable, enjoyable, like ready to drink classic expressions of the grape. So if it's something that you're enjoying right now, like it's an exciting time to explore this particular tier in the region.
Yeah, like Langhe Nebbiolo isn't like a poor man's Barolo. I mean, it's an expression of Nebbiolo that is drinkable, and like as people who've watched my sessions and shows before, that like I don't like relying on ageability to describe the beauty of a wine. That like there is a sense of immediacy that should come with a wine, that you should feel confident opening it. You shouldn't feel guilty, and you shouldn't feel like, oh, when do I open this wine? Like it detracts from the experience so much when you're worried about, is this the right or the wrong time to open it? Like, and finding wines that give you that guilt-free experience is a really, really important tool to have, especially when you talk about Piedmont, especially when you talk about Nebbiolo. Like the Pinot Noir is probably the only other grape that has this level of anxiety with when you should open it, and that's so silly. Like it's such a poor way to think about wine, because the winemakers want people to drink their wine and just enjoy it and enjoy the work and the creativity and the like, they're part of their soul that they've infused into this bottle, and not worried about like, is it drinkable in 10 to 20? Like it's such a dry way to think about wine. Like,
yeah, that's the funny thing about this wine too, is like they bottle it in formats up to like Methuselah. And the
challenge accepted
events that they've done at Barbarians, for example, they're like walking around with a Methuselah of Perbacco on their shoulder, pouring it for everyone. And like sometimes producers are bottling wines in those formats because they really believe that it's the best format from an oxygen ingress kind of perspective and ageability. But sometimes it's like, this isn't a big ass bottle because you should drink a lot of this, like with
this is my brain. I want a Methuselah of Perbacco. And everyone, I need your written commitment in chat that whenever it arrives, that will bring growlers, and I will pump Perbacco into that growler for you, and you can walk away and you can just have I assume probably like 2 to 3 months worth of like Perbacco that you can just get on tap at any time of day. Let's do it.
I'm in. Let's do it.
Why not? Like 2021, we've done enough. We've sacrificed enough. Why are we second guessing ourselves? Let's just have fun. The Roaring 20s are going to be here.
Exactly. We'll get the Peter Pan logo like in wax on the side.
Something. Who can, like, let's just do it. Let's just like wine. There's so many paradigms and so many like traditions with wine that frustrate me to no end. And if it frustrates me, I can only imagine that like there's like people who aren't sommeliers like me or Toni, you don't even aware of it, but like there's so much gatekeeping, especially in like wines and like wines like Nebbiolo, that that's so artificial. Like that's not what the winemaker cares. They don't care about how resellable or how high the price is at auction. Like they just want their wines to be drunk and enjoy.
Exactly.
So important. Like it's so much more important than a vintage or a
100%.
Talking forever about this.
No. Should we drink some Barolo? Speaking of,
yeah, let's drink some Barolo. But while everyone sniffs and smells and Toni is experiencing the Barolo, it's time for Cheese Corner. And Cheese Corner is the best time of the session. As promised, I got a truffle infused cheese. This is I tried to get a Piedmontese cheese, and I did, and that's for tomorrow. I'm really sorry, everyone. but I thought truffle infused was the more important part of the conversation when I was talking about cheese. So I've got a white truffle infused pecorino from Tuscany called Cacio de Bosco. I'm putting in the chat now. So whilst you get to see me eat white truffle infused pecorino, which is a sheep's milk cheese, in case you want to know. Also grape, also region. It's very confusing. I apologize. Pecorino is one of the worst words ever used in the sign language. It is delicious. It could go so well with Barolo. Toni,
Yeah.
while I chew,
Yes.
lead us through what you get in the glass of the Barolo, the Castiglione 2016.
Yeah. So, I mean, rather than kind of tell you what I'm tasting, which I will, but I think let's talk about a little bit about the wine and like the vintage, because it's exceptional. I mean, I think we're going to probably all land on 2016 being the best vintage of the last 20 years. Its only competitor being maybe 2010. So that's something that I think everyone should be thinking about when they're tasting the wine. Sometimes when you are also looking at like an exceptional vintage, it's not something you want to drink when it's young. Sometimes it's quite shut down. In this case, I think you're getting a ton of aroma like immediately. This has been open for like 24 hours or so.
Yeah.
So if you were to buy a bottle of this and you wanted to drink it right away, I think you could, but I would definitely decant it for like at least an hour, if not 2 or 3. Castiglione. So it's interesting with this bottling. It's the flagship Barolo for the winery. They are well known for their crus. They were one of the first in 1961 to bottle Barolo under single vineyard names and crus. The tradition in Barolo has always been to blend, and now it's becoming. It's basically on the verge of becoming law that they will be recognized as crus. They are already recognized as MGAs, but it's a little bit confusing for the consumer, and they're still kind of pursuing a clarification of that. So all that to say, the wine's called Castiglione because the winery itself is in Castiglione Folletto, but most of the grapes that they're using for this, it's sourced from about 10 different parcels, but most of them are from Ribera. So Ribera is quite a large, highly elevated cru that's located in Nebbiolo. They bought the parcel that they have in the mid 90s when nobody was really making wine in Nebbiolo other than Elvio Conio. He was really the pioneer in that commune, and specifically in the cru that is Ribera. But at that point, like I said, it's quite large. It's quite highly elevated. You had to be very specific about where you purchased your plot in Ribera in order to get higher quality. And now, again, as climate change does what it does, Ribera is becoming one of the most consistently exceptional crus in all of Barolo. So most of the fruit for this is coming from there, but then bits and pieces from different vineyards in which they own parcels all over Barolo. All of it is estate. There is some barrique on this as well. I would say you can definitely kind of detect that sort of sitting on the top of the wine, which is always an indication to me as well of it needing or would benefit from more time in bottle, and that it's well integrated, but it is sort of sitting on the top of the wine. Thank you.
Someone was asking what glass you're drinking from.
This is a fancy just for you. I almost never use them because I'm afraid to wash them.
I know.
Just sit next to my sink.
I mean, if there's 2 true words, everyone shares. There's 2 statements that everyone shares. 1, I go to the cheese boutique and I spend lots of money, and 2, I love my Zoltos, but I'm really scared of washing them. It's like a statement of our time.
They tell you can put them in the dishwasher, but
my partner Pete, he's absolutely put it in the dishwasher, and I have been horrified when I open the dishwasher. They're like next to like metal saucepans, and I'm like, yeah. But can't drink out of a glass if you're scared if it's going to be broken. Like that. I mean, I love my Zolto. I love it. It's a great glass. If you want to spend a lot of money on glassware, buy a Zolto. But there's something to be said about having a glass that you're too scared to drink out of. It's something I think my grandparents would have said. Like they've got a dish, they've got like a dinnerware set, but no one's ever good enough to eat from them. It's like
and obviously, like, you know, Burgundies are more traditional for Nebbiolo tastings, but I find these Alto Burgundies to be like so huge that very few wines can actually perform well in them. Like I could almost fit my head in a Alto Burgundy. So I prefer the Bordeaux in general for the most part, or the universals are perfect, which I think is what you've got there.
Yeah. I really like this wine. Like, I want a bit of. We talk about Barolo. Barolo is, like I said, a minefield. Producers, vintages, crus, all these words on the label that producers are trying to distinguish and make their Barolo more unique than everyone else's. So it's one of those things that you need to like. I hate bogging people down with like this much level of detail, but like it is something where like you need to look at a little bit of vintage, and you need to look a little bit at producer, and you need to look a little bit at where the area of Barolo it's from. But for me, find a producer you really like. Keep an eye like on vintage. I think the saying, I don't know, Tony, you can comment, but like that a Barolo needs 10 years. I don't know if that's true anymore. I don't think you need to have that such a rigid sort of ranking window for Barolo.
I mean, I think like anything else in wine, this comes down to personal preference. I don't really believe in like empirical truths when it comes to wine. I mean, other than like wine faults, it's all about your personal taste. So I think some people prefer to drink wine that still is a little bit on its fruit, that maybe still has a little bit of grip to it. They enjoy that. They like pairing foods with that. There are multiple things you can do that will bring out the best in those wines. And, you know, personally, like I don't love drinking super, super old wine. Like I do want there to be some fruit still in the glass for me.
I respect that. Not enough people say that. People need to say that.
Storage is so key. So if it's been immaculately stored, like that's a different story. That's very difficult to come by until I'm, you know, old and gray and have start cracking into my own kind of wine cellar. I've aged these wines myself, but in our market in particular, when we come across older bottles, it can be tough to know like what the provenance is of this wine and where it's been and how many times it's been moved and that kind of thing. And those things really do affect wine. So all that is to say that I agree with you entirely. I don't think anyone should be too focused on tucking their wines away, never to be seen again. You know, drink the thing, especially if you buy a case. Like one of the favorite things to do is like crack one. I know it's too young, but like let's see how it's drinking. And then continue and allow that to inform when you're going to drink the rest of the case, and base it on your own kind of personal preferences and your own read on the wine.
And that's my personal philosophy. If I'm if I'm buying a wine that like people would say, oh, you should age it, like I'll try to buy 2 bottles if I can afford it, so that I can have one now and then like have an experience later and go, okay, this is kind of when it should like.
Yeah.
Well, like
there are also like
such a like distraction of enjoying Barolo is how old the wine is.
I was going to say, don't underestimate the power of a good decant, like of several hours or the day before. Like this is one of the single most important things you can do.
It is such an important lesson. Like wine isn't as fragile as people think it is.
Yeah, make the choice, decide what you're having for dinner like the day before, choose the wine, and then that morning open that wine. And it doesn't need to be, you can do that with your Barberas, you can do that with anything. You should do that with your whites. Air is good. For well-made wines, air is like a very good thing.
I'm sure I've shown it in a session, my little flask that I use. And I try to, if I have people over, I'm like having wine for dinner, I'll try and decant everything just to get more oxygen in it. And like, it's funny, like people are like, oh, this wine's not going to last, so what can I do? And it's like, it's funny because the people I respect the most are like, oh, this wine was great, but I had it 2 weeks later and it was so much better. It was just open in my fridge or whatever. And it's like, ugh, like my mind is blown.
So
So,
someone was asking, like, is there any wines that you don't decant? With Burgundy, like, no, I don't usually decant.
maybe.
I will decant super young Burgundy, like
Yeah.
when I'm talking about like on release Burgundy. But for the most part, I think opening Burgundy well in advance is a really smart thing to do.
So good.
But you do want to be a little bit more delicate with those wines.
Mm.
I think, you know, from Luca Corrado's point of view with Vietti, his perspective of Barolo in general is that it is one of the only wines kind of that are meant to age for 20 or 30 years that you should still decant, where he wouldn't probably say that about maybe Burgundy or Bordeaux, but that Nebbiolo thrives with
I really like this wine. It's so delicious. I want to show the bottle. I'm not really
yeah, it's exciting.
It's
an exciting wine for sure.
almonds.
I mean, I was getting
Walnut. It's a walnut opening up. The walnut bloom. There's a walnut there.
We were getting requests for this wine for the last year, like when are the 16s coming? When are the 16s coming?
And I said I want all of them, and
we sold through them pretty quickly. And the crews from Vietti were also very well rated and regarded, so it's been a very popular vintage. But like I said, I mean, increasingly that is the case in Piemonte. 2013 was a great vintage. 2010 was a slightly better vintage. 2016 might be better than all three. I mean, really only 2002 is.
I didn't know 2016 was a great vintage for Barolo. I've actually got I'm planning a Barolo dinner, and I've got all 2016. So maybe.
Amazing. Everyone who is going should be very thrilled.
No one. I haven't got that far, but I hope people come. I mean, that'll be.
I don't think you'll have a problem.
Yeah, I do. Well, I mean,
really quickly.
We've done all the wines. I've got like I should give away a bottle of wine because that's what I want to do now. It's time for our giveaway. I was like, do I give a bottle of red? It seems more appropriate. Barbera nasty. Everyone loves it. But no, we're giving away a bottle of white wine. I got so much Arneis and I really want people to share it. So it's that time of day where I get to put this really horrible wheel of fun up on the screen. Who's ready? Everyone's name's here. I think I just pressed.
This is so exciting.
Last week it was Bruce Wellner was nearly selected, and I was so worried. Laura! Hope there's not more than one Laura, because that would actually Laura Robinson. We all know who it is. Wonderful, Laura. I will be in touch. You've won a bowl of wine. I hope you enjoy it. But I'll send you an email. Oh, okay, Laura Robinson understood. Yeah, congratulations. But it's the fun part of what we do. I mean, why not? Everyone deserves a giant spinning wheel of multicolored craziness to see if you win a bottle of wine.
It's a fun way to cap off the tasting.
I mean, yeah, you got to keep people engaged. You got to hook them into right to the end. But before we sort of sign off, I just wanted to thank our sponsors. Not me, they don't sponsor me, but they sponsor someone, another som, another industry person who may not be able to afford to come to a tasting and just taste some cool wines and just feel excited and engaged again. But thank you, Christina Roman, who was kind enough to sponsor someone to come. I think that's really special and we definitely appreciate it. And obviously, thank you, Toni. I mean, I will see you again tomorrow because we've got a whole second session.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for your time. And I don't know, like, I think there's a lot. I mean, we could do 7 sessions and just talk about Vietti, and like, I think there's a lot to unpack, and there's a lot of history, and there's lots of other wines that we could talk about. But I think I thank you for giving everyone a really nice overview of Vietti, and like a little, hopefully, like what I always try to preach is like a little bit more confidence, perhaps navigating Vietti wines and also navigating Piedmontese wines, because they can be confusing and they can be intimidating, and wine shouldn't wine doesn't need to be intimidating. It is. It's intimidating for everyone. Toni, me, you, every single person gets intimidated by wine. But hopefully we've bridged a little bit, shortened that gap a little bit, and you feel a little bit more confident drinking. Toni, did you enjoy? I mean, what was your favorite wine tonight?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And you are one of my favorite people to discuss wine with always. So I'm always thrilled to be a part of something like this. And I just think it's so amazing that you've put this together in this time. I know that the chat is full of people who are very grateful for you and everything that you and your team does. So
I appreciate you on a Saturday night when I'm catching the bus home and I'm like, I've sold out of the first Vietti, and I texted you and I was like, do you think we could do a second session? Do you have enough wine for me? And you were like, absolutely. And you jumped on it. Like, that level of enthusiasm for like what crazy shit I come up with is rarer than you think. Most people are like, let me get back to you. I like the beauty and why I love you so much, Toni, is that you embrace this stupid thing that brain that comes up with all these crazy things, and I really appreciate it for you because I need enablers.
I'm happy to enable you. I'm blushing. I don't know if you can see that I'm blushing.
No, it's fine. Thank you very much, everyone, again, obviously, for coming. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoyed everything. Obviously, if you've got friends, we've got probably 10 more tickets for tomorrow night. Me and Toni, I mean, come again. Who cares? We'll get the wines out to you. We'll figure it out. Taste the wines again. You might win a bottle of wine. You might get to figure out what other cheese I'm tasting. I don't know. I don't know. We've got 10 more tickets. I'd love to sell them out. So
have a map tomorrow, maybe? We were just like,
sorry?
Maybe a map tomorrow? I don't know. We're working on a map. I'm going to draw a map.
No. There is a map, and I'm going to get you a map because maps are fun and exciting, and we all know that.
We all know.
And yeah, follow me, Nick Oliveira, at Instagram. Subscribe to my YouTube. Follow Toni at Webbingston. I think that's your
it's
thing.
A weird one. It's Webbingston. Yes, please follow.
Yeah, great. And I guess if you drink a Vietti wine in the future, we want to know, and we want you to feel like, you can be excited about it. If you find a Dolcetto, I mean, we didn't even talk about Dolcetto. We even get there. We'll get to the Dolcetto one day. Everyone have a lovely evening. Thank you very much for hanging out with us. Bye, Toni. I will see you tomorrow. And everyone have a lovely